So welcome to Training for Gold, how to make PCI DSS assessments stress-free. Now, before we get started, let me be clear, this is a time to pull out your notebooks. There is a good possibility that we'll say something very profound, and if you ask us about it later, we probably won't remember. So make sure you take your notes now. So with that, before we decide to show you how to make these things stress-free, I need to stress you out a little bit. So last year, according to the Gartner report from May of 2021, companies spent over $150 billion on different cybersecurity services and tools. But why did we spend that much money? Well, one of the reasons is because back in 2020, according to the Verizon Payment Security Report, 67% of exfiltration attacks were successful. They got what they wanted. That same year, 53% of those successful attacks went undetected. We didn't know they were in the room until they'd already gotten what they wanted. And finally, of those attacks, 91% did not generate a single alert that would have warned the team that there was somebody in your system trying to get all of your information and all of your data. So yeah, that's a pretty good reason to spend $150 billion, right? Well, now that we've kind of painted the scene a little bit, let me introduce myself. I'm Tiana Clewis. I am the president of Baxter Clewis Consulting. I am a former CPA and fraud examiner. I started my career with Ernst & Young in their fraud group, and now I'm running a business with my taller half.
Hi, everyone. I'm Boyd Clewis, and I am the vice president at Baxter Clewis Consulting, where we recruit, we train, and we place PCI DSS subject matter experts at businesses across the globe. Before starting at Baxter Clewis, I was a QSA as well as the senior security architect for American Airlines, and I am so excited to be back here live and in person. Scott?
And hi there, my name is Scott Davis. As you can see from this TV we borrowed from Times Square, I am a QSA and senior PCI Assessor with Frazier and Deeter. I am also a cybersecurity consultant with Baxter Clewis. I started my career on the infrastructure and the networking infrastructure side of things, so I've seen compliance from both perspectives. I've seen what it looks like internally, where you're making sure your processes and your technologies are secure and ready to go, and I've also been on the compliance and assurance side of things as well. So I know what it looks like from both perspectives. And so today, I'll walk you through a bit of our agenda. We'll be talking about our learning objectives, first of all. Why are we here? Secondly, the reality of what PCI assessments currently look like and often look like for organizations versus what we call the gold standard. You'll be hearing about that. And then lastly, to that end, I'll be talking about recommendations for your organization to reach that level. So let's dig into it. On these learning objectives, we're going to talk about uncovering how current training models, despite our best efforts, are leaving your company vulnerable to breach and compliance failures. We'll talk about ways to reduce the failure rate of time-based PCI DSS requirements. Now, if you are here and you have developed a time machine or some type of technology to remediate that problem, this is the group you want to share that technology with. But if that's not the case, we need to talk about reducing the failure of those PCI DSS time-based requirements. Lastly, we'll talk about key strategies to improve the timeline and efficiency of your annual PCI DSS assessment without investing in new tools and software. So let's talk about this for a minute. We're all friends, right? We can be real with this. The reality of going through PCI assessments for many organizations, the people, despite our best efforts, lacking adequate training. We have processes that are not aligned with security best practices. And if they are aligned with security best practices, we'll find that they're often not documented. And that documentation is one of those things that often we know in the back of our minds that this is important, but it doesn't really become important, like really important, until it becomes audit time or until somebody crucial leaves the organization and all of a sudden we're thinking, okay, well, Billy left the organization and he was responsible for all this and now he's not here, so what do? We have to deal with that. Lastly, the technology. You know, we've been in the boardrooms and we've signed the check, we've made the investment and seen, unfortunately, limited return many times. So That is the reality that many organizations face, and we have to deal with that. What else? Increased assessment duration, because everyone here, of course, has just unlimited budgets, right, to just keep these things going month after month. And of course, we don't have any business partners or any third parties who have a stake in our compliance dates. They understand, right? If we're a week or a month out and maybe our rock dates lapse, and they're not worried about that, right? Definitely not the case. What else? Intense anxiety at all levels of the organization. So we're talking management, we're talking the C-suites, we're talking about the rank and file, management, HR, everybody has that intense anxiety, and it doesn't have to be that way. Again, the failure of time-based PCI DSS requirements, that's something we have to deal with over and over again, it seems. Increased assessment cost due to remediation. Again, I know, you may have that unlimited budget where you can just keep these things going on, but many of us aren't in that boat. And lastly, the increased risk of a costly security incident. Now, everything else on this list is bad enough, right? You get to the last item on this list, and if you're not there, if you've not experienced this, you don't know how scary and how dark that can be until you have that security incident where you might be facing loss of revenue or loss of reputation. That's a situation that is all too true for many organizations, and it's not a great place to be. We do not want that for our people. So that's the reality for many organizations. I've painted a pretty bleak picture here, so I'm going to turn it over to Boyd to try to make things a little bit better for us. How can it be better?
So this stress, believe it or not, in our research and time working with several different companies, it comes from a simple word, unknown. Oftentimes, business leaders, they're stressed out because they hear that the QSA is coming, and they don't know what their team has done to prepare. And then on the other hand, you have team members, whether it's a system administrator, a database administrator, that's responsible for delivering certain pieces of evidence for applicable PCI DSS requirements, but they don't know what to do. So all this uncertainty leads to stress, anxiety, and a mountain of remediation. And that's no good. But man, we're not here to rag and talk negative the whole time. I'm here because there is a better way. And that better way is something that we call the gold standard. And we actually got this from, back in my younger days, I actually used to run track. So I was like, yeah, running for gold, right? So this is the gold standard. That's what we all are striving for. So what we're going to do today is we're going to share some insight from one of our clients of how they made this transition. You can go ahead and advance the slide. So the gold standard was actually responsible from taking this assessment from 12 months to complete down to 8 months. I don't know about you, but if you can give me 4 months of my year back of doing PCI work, I'll write you a nice check, a very nice check. So this is what it looks like in the gold standard. It is a culture of compliance which can lead to the state of security. It's evolving more than the QSA is coming, we got to do this, to we need to do this not only for compliance, but because of security requirements. It starts with the culture. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down some components of this gold standard so that you can go back and implement it. And I'm going to be honest with you. It's simple. We're not about to give you anything that's super complex for you to go back and do. This is simple, but it comes down to getting the right team members in place to do it. So one of the biggest things is the first thing, the important. So I mentioned earlier the unknown, the anxiety. It's creating role-specific training. I don't know if we have any QSAs in the room or ISAs, and you sat in an interview and the person being interviewed didn't know what they were talking about from a PCI standpoint. And then you end up with a mountain of findings. But what we found is when we work with our clients and we create role-specific PCI trainings, it helps address the common risk and vulnerabilities associated with the role. The training needs to also be, has the applicable requirements for those specific roles, because this will allow the teams to integrate PCI security into their normal day-to-day operations because they are actually aware of it. And so this is really important, especially to achieve security best practices.
The next recommendation actually goes back to what Scott mentioned earlier, documentation. But the documentation needs to be compliance-based, and it needs to be, as you can see, we have some criteria here: clear, accurate, and accessible. How many times have you read what was supposed to be an operating procedure and you actually didn't know what the heck was going on when you finished reading it? When I read your documentation, let me put it this way. If your spouse, who knows nothing about PCI or nothing about that role, can't pick up that document, sit at your desk, and start doing the work, that SOP is not clear. It needs to be accurate. How many times have you guys walked into an assessment and you're looking at the documentation they provided you on the process, or you're looking at the documentation your team provided you on the process, and you then have them walk through what they actually do and nothing reconciles? It needs to be accurate. That also means that that document is going to end up being a living, breathing document. It's not something that you create one time and you just let it sit there. That's the reason why you'll see one of our recommendations is a periodic review schedule. We need to periodically review those documents to make sure that we haven't made any changes in the last 3 months or 6 months that's completely changed how this process works. Because if I already have this documentation, when we give it to the QSA, there aren't going to be any issues. We already know our processes align with what we actually have written down. And finally, it needs to be accessible. How many hours has your team wasted trying to make up a new process, even though you know there's one documented, but you don't know where it is? They can't access the SharePoint because it's locked down to a super heavy degree. Or they can't figure out, okay, how are these folders organized so that I know which documentation to grab? We have to make sure clear, accurate, and accessible. We have to make sure that we communicate these changes. I've seen way too many companies make changes to their operating procedures, and the only people who know about it are the couple of people who are actively doing the role. No, the people who are above them and below them especially need to know that this change was made, because when they start talking to the QSA, if, for example, the person who's responsible for the role isn't the first one in the conversation, well, at least what the higher up says or what the person down below says is going to match up, because they also know that the change occurred. We also want to make sure that there is a last revision date. If we have a policy where we are periodically reviewing it, we say we review this every 3 months, every 6 months, and I get one that has a last revision date from a year ago, that probably means I'm not pulling the right policy. I'm not pulling the right documentation. And how many times have we seen a company get in trouble because they gave us an old version of the documentation and not the current version? That's a great way to just cut down on time, because we know that we actually have the right version. What else you got, Scott?
So, yeah, right. So what else? Next is establishing of accountability systems. Every process, every control, every application in your organization, and our organizations have responsible parties. So quick story time. I don't know if there's anyone in this room who's experienced this. I would imagine so. But I've been on a number of PCI walkthroughs, and I'll be leading the interview and the walkthrough, and I'll start off with some high-level questions, trying to understand the application or the process or whatever it is that we're interviewing about. And I'll just start asking the questions, and I'll get ready to take notes, and it is silent. I'll ask a question, and then there is nothing, just crickets. That's uncomfortable, right? So if you do that for 30 seconds on a walkthrough, it's like, oh my goodness, am I still connected? Did I lose connection? Am I muted? Does nobody know that I'm talking right now? And if you're thinking, oh, he's talking about us, trust me, I'm not. This is a common struggle that organizations have, is accountability. People know which processes are theirs. People know that they're accountable. And that's key. Trust but verify, right? That is what we do, not just as assessors, but internally for our organizations. We are all better. And we are all more secure and sounder and just better at what we do when we know that we are accountable to somebody else. So when it comes time to review the process or review the application or check up on, if you've got management checking up on you and making sure these processes are going the way that they should be, it's not a reflection on your character, it's not a reflection on your honesty. It's a reflection on our humanity, because again, we're all better when we have accountability. We have assigned responsible parties for each process, but also, again, that periodic review. And lastly, the collection and maintenance of the evidence. And so we've got people, we've got teams who've been through the process before. They know what's expected of them. They know that it's coming. And most importantly, not just during assessment time, but any time throughout the year, they can produce compliant evidence, because compliance and security are so interwoven into the organization that it's as commonplace as clocking in and out every day. And so that's what we call business as usual. That's what we call having PCI and really compliance and security, again, interwoven into the very fabric of the organization, into every process. And if you have that, if you've captured that, then these PCI assessments, all of a sudden it goes from this really stressful few months to, again, just business as usual. And that is so great. It is a much better path than what we see all too often. So that's the next recommendation. I believe Boyd has one more for us.
I do. So I know many of you may be wondering, okay, so you guys are talking about all these SOPs and you're talking about this role-specific training. Who's gonna do it? Who's gonna do it, right? Exactly. So what we recommend is, we found that our clients have the most success when they dedicated a PCI DSS champion. This is a subject matter expert that understands the controls inside and out and can translate those into business requirements that business units can use to meet the objective. You would think of this person like the Rosetta Stone for PCI DSS. They'd be responsible for reviewing all changes that could impact the CDE, as well as weigh in on potential new vendors and processes that could impact the security of the CDE or the current PCI assessment. And the cool thing about this is, this person could actually develop the training that's going to help ease the burden for everyone else. This is something that I did in my career, and that's why we developed this business model, because we've seen how companies understanding the requirements, having systems in place to collect evidence and review it monthly without waiting until it's time for the QSA to come, significantly reduce the time and the cost. And as a consultant, I understand how much it costs when you have those assessment overages. So all you other consultants, don't hurt me. But we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and making sure that we can put people in the position to reduce the stress of these assessments, because they don't have to be. It doesn't have to be stressful at all. So in closing, so what we came to tell you is, yes, we can spend a lot of money on technology, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's some pretty cool tools out there that get the job done. But we think you need to reverse engineer that process. First, make the investment in your staff resources, so then they're equipped to operate the technology that can help reduce breach, as well as put the company in the position to maintain and achieve PCI DSS compliance. And with that, we thank you all for being here.